A single bullet can change everything. When Daniel Hayes threw himself in front of a stranger's gun, he thought he was just saving a pregnant woman's life. He had no idea that Sophia Lane carried secrets that would shatter everything he believed about heroism, love, and the price of doing what's right. This is their story, a tale of sacrifice that became salvation, of strangers who became family, and of love that bloomed in the shadow of betrayal. Before we dive into this incredible journey, I want to invite you to stay with us until the very end. Comment below with the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel and connecting with viewers from around the world. Now let's begin. The morning of September 15th started like any other Tuesday for Daniel Hayes. The alarm clock's shrill cry cut through the thin walls of his cramped Chicago apartment at 5:30 a.m., jolting him from the restless sleep that had become his constant companion since Sarah's death 3 years ago. He rolled over his calloused hand, instinctively reaching for the empty space beside him, before reality crashed back down like a cold wave. "Daddy." Emma's small voice drifted through the darkness from the doorway. At 7 years old, she still had nightmares, still woke up looking for the mother who would never come home. "I'm here, sweetheart." Daniel whispered, his voice rough with sleep and unshed tears. He pulled back the covers and she scrambled into bed beside him, her tiny body trembling slightly. These moments when the world was quiet, and it was just the two of them against everything else, were both his greatest comfort and his deepest source of pain. "I dreamed about Mommy again," Emma said, curling up against his chest. Her hair smelled like the cheap shampoo he'd bought at the dollar store, but to him it was sweeter than any perfume. Daniel's throat tightened. "What did you dream about?" She was making pancakes, the ones with the smiley faces, and she told me she missed us. Emma looked up at him with those wide blue eyes that were so much like Sarah's, it sometimes took his breath away. "Do you think she really misses us, Daddy?" The question hit him like a physical blow. How do you explain eternity to a 7-year-old? How do you tell your daughter that her mother isn't coming back when you're still struggling to accept it yourself? "I think," he said carefully, stroking her hair, "that wherever Mommy is, she loves us very much. And that love doesn't just disappear." Emma seemed satisfied with this answer, snuggling closer. They lay there in the growing light, and Daniel allowed himself these precious few minutes before the chaos of the day began. Outside, Chicago was waking up, traffic starting to build, neighbors heading to jobs that paid enough to live somewhere better than this neighborhood, where sirens were the lullabies and broken dreams littered the streets like autumn leaves. But in this moment, in this bed, with his daughter's steady breathing against his chest, Daniel Hayes felt rich. It was a feeling that wouldn't last long. By 7 a.m., they were in their morning routine. Daniel made eggs and toast while Emma got dressed for school, in clothes that were clean, but too small hand-me-downs from neighbors who understood what it meant to make every dollar stretch until it screamed. The rent was due in 2 weeks, and he was already $50 short. His job at Morrison Construction paid decent money when there was work, but September had been slow and winter was coming. "Daddy, can I have lunch money today?" Emma asked, her voice small and hopeful. Daniel's hands paused over the skillet. He'd packed her a peanut butter sandwich again, because it was all they could afford. The other kids had hot lunches, pizza Fridays, chocolate milk. Emma never complained, but he saw the way she looked at their trays, the longing in her eyes. "Maybe tomorrow, sweetheart," he said, hating himself for the lie. There wouldn't be lunch money tomorrow either. "It's okay, Daddy. I like peanut butter sandwiches." She smiled at him, that radiant, unconditional love that children give so freely, and it broke his heart all over again. The walk to Lincoln Elementary took them through 3 blocks of cracked sidewalks and boarded-up buildings. Daniel held Emma's hand tightly, hyper-aware of every shadow, every stranger. This neighborhood wasn't safe for a little girl, but it was what they could afford. Every month he promised himself he'd find a way to move them somewhere better. Every month, reality crushed that promise under the weight of bills and circumstances beyond his control. "Mr. Hayes," Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, called out as they approached the school. She was one of the good ones, a teacher who actually cared about the kids instead of just collecting a paycheck. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Daniel's stomach dropped. Emma skipped ahead to join her friends, and he approached Mrs. Rodriguez with the kind of dread that had become familiar, the fear that he was failing his daughter in yet another way. "Is everything all right?" he asked. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled gently. "Emma's doing wonderfully in class. She's bright, creative, and kind to the other children. But," she hesitated, "I've noticed she's been falling asleep during afternoon lessons. And yesterday she mentioned that she was hungry." The words hit Daniel like physical blows. He'd been working double shifts when he could get them, leaving Emma with Mrs. Chen next door until late at night. And the food. God, he'd been so careful with portions, making sure Emma got enough while he survived on coffee and whatever was left. "I'm doing my best," he said quietly, pride and shame warring in his voice. "I know you are." Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes were kind but concerned. "There are programs that can help. Free lunch, after-school care. We don't need charity." The words came out sharper than he intended, defensive walls slamming into place. "It's not charity, Mr. Hayes. It's support. There's a difference." Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice. He kissed Emma goodbye and walked away, her teacher's words echoing in his head. Support. Such a simple word, but it felt foreign to him now. Since Sarah died, it had been just him and Emma against the world, and most days it felt like they were losing. The job site that morning was a high-end office building downtown, the kind of place where people wore suits that cost more than Daniel made in a month. He'd been hired to install custom cabinetry on the 20th floor, work that required precision and skill he'd developed over 15 years in construction. It was good work, honest work, but as he rode the elevator up past floor after floor of gleaming success, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was invisible to the people who lived in this world. "Hayes!" Tony Morrison's voice boomed across the construction site. Tony was a good boss, fair and straight-talking, but business was business. "Need to talk to you." Daniel's blood chilled. He set down his tools and walked over, steeling himself for bad news. "The client's happy with your work," Tony said, and Daniel allowed himself a moment of relief. "But they're cutting the project short. Budget constraints. We'll finish up today, but that's it." The words hit harder than any physical blow. This job was supposed to last 3 weeks. Emma needed school clothes. They needed groceries. The rent wasn't going to pay itself. "Is there anything else coming up?" Daniel asked, hating the desperation he heard in his own voice. Tony's expression softened. "I'll call you if something comes up. You know I will. You're one of my best guys." Daniel nodded and went back to work, muscle memory guiding his hands while his mind raced. One of the best guys, but still expendable. Still one missed paycheck away from disaster. By noon, he was walking the streets looking for any kind of work. Day labor, moving jobs, anything that would put cash in his pocket today. The autumn sun was warm on his shoulders, and Michigan Avenue bustled with the kind of energy that made Chicago feel alive. Business people hurried past with important places to be. Tourists took photos of the architecture. Couples walked hand in hand without a care in the world. Daniel felt like a ghost among them, invisible and forgotten. He was checking his phone for the 100th time, hoping for a call about work, when he heard the commotion ahead. A crowd was gathering near the fountain in front of the Millennium Building. Voices raised in alarm. Daniel's instincts, honed by years of construction work and single parenthood, told him something was wrong. He pushed through the crowd and saw her, a woman with long dark hair and elegant clothes, her hands pressed protectively over her rounded belly. She was maybe 6 months pregnant, and her face was pale with terror. Across from her, barely 20 feet away, a man in a dark hoodie was raising a gun. Time slowed to a crawl. Daniel saw the gunman's finger tighten on the trigger. He saw the woman's lips form a silent plea. He saw the crowd, scattering people, diving for cover, abandoning this pregnant stranger to her fate. And in that crystalline moment of clarity, Daniel Hayes made the choice that would change everything. He didn't think about his own safety. He didn't think about Emma waiting for him at school or who would take care of her if something happened to him. He only thought about the life growing inside this woman, about innocence that deserved protection, about doing what was right even when it cost everything. Daniel lunged forward, his body moving with the desperate strength of a man who had nothing left to lose except his conscience. His shoulder connected with the woman just as the gun fired, the crack of the bullet splitting the air like thunder. The woman stumbled backward, safe alive, her baby protected by a stranger's sacrifice. The bullet meant for her tore through Daniel's shoulder instead, the impact spinning him around and sending him crashing to the pavement. Pain exploded through his body, white hot and overwhelming, but even as he fell, even as his vision blurred, and darkness crept in. At the edges, he heard the most beautiful sound in the world. The woman was crying, but she was alive. "Call 911!" someone screamed. "Get that son of a bitch!" Another voice shouted, and Daniel heard running footsteps, the sounds of a struggle as bystanders tackled the gunman. But his focus narrowed to the woman kneeling beside him, her hands pressed against his wound to stop the bleeding. Her face was beautiful, even streaked with tears, her eyes a deep brown that reminded him of autumn leaves. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why did you do that? You don't even know me." Daniel tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Darkness was pulling at him, and he felt himself slipping away. The last thing he saw before consciousness fled was her face, those beautiful brown eyes filled with gratitude, and something else, something that looked like the beginning of love. When Daniel woke up, the world had changed forever. The hospital room was small and sterile, filled with the antiseptic smell of industrial cleaners and the steady beep of monitoring equipment. Sunlight streamed through the window, telling him that hours had passed, maybe longer. His shoulder was immobilized in a complex web of bandages and supports, and every movement sent lightning bolts of agony through his upper body. But he was alive. "You're awake." The voice was soft, musical, and familiar. Daniel turned his head and saw her, the woman from the street, sitting in a chair beside his bed. She looked different now, calmer but somehow more fragile, as if the events of the day had stripped away some invisible armor. "How long have I been out?" Daniel's voice was rough, his throat dry as sandpaper. 8 hours. The surgery went well. The doctor said you were lucky the bullet missed anything vital." She leaned forward, and he could see the genuine concern in her eyes. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot," Daniel said, attempting a weak smile. "But I felt worse." It was a lie, but it made her smile, and somehow that made the pain a little more bearable. "I'm Sophia," she said. "Sophia Lane." "Daniel Hayes." He tried to sit up straighter and immediately regretted it as pain shot through his shoulder. "Is the baby okay?" Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, a protective gesture that was becoming second nature. "The baby's fine. Thanks to you." Tears gathered in her eyes again. The doctors said the stress could have caused complications, but everything looks normal. You saved us both. Daniel studied her face, this stranger, who had somehow become the most important person in his world, for 8 terrifying seconds on a Chicago street. She was beautiful, but it was more than that. There was something in her eyes, a depth of character that spoke of both strength and vulnerability. "Where's the guy who shot me?" Daniel asked. "In custody. Apparently he's been following me for weeks." Sophia's voice grew quiet, troubled. "The police think it was attempted murder, not a random robbery. Someone wanted you dead." The words came out harsher than Daniel intended, colored by a protective anger that surprised him. He barely knew this woman, but the thought of someone deliberately trying to harm her made his blood boil. Sophia nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. "My family. It's complicated. There's money involved, inheritance issues. My stepbrother has been making threats, but I never thought." She trailed off, looking lost. "Family can be the most dangerous enemy of all," Daniel said quietly, thinking of his own past, of the father who had walked out when times got tough, and the mother who had chosen addiction over her children. "Do you have family, Daniel?" Sophia asked, and something in her voice told him this wasn't just small talk. She genuinely wanted to know. "A daughter, Emma. She's 7. The words came out rough with emotion. "She's everything to me." "Where is she now?" Daniel's heart clenched as he realized how much time had passed. School should be out by now. Mrs. Chen, my neighbor, was supposed to pick her up, but... He tried to reach for his phone and gasped as pain lanced through his shoulder. "Let me call," Sophia said quickly. She had his phone in her hand. When had she gotten that and was already dialing? "How do you have my number?" Daniel asked. "The hospital needed an emergency contact. You only had one number in your recent calls, Mrs. Chen." Sophia held the phone to her ear, waiting. "Hello, Mrs. Chen. This is a friend of Daniel Hayes. He's been in an accident, but he's okay. Is Emma there?" Daniel could hear the elderly Chinese woman's voice through the phone, rapid-fire questions in accented English. Sophia handled them with a grace and patience that impressed him. "Yes, he's going to be fine. He was hurt protecting someone, and he's in the hospital overnight for observation. Would it be possible for Emma to stay with you tonight? I can arrange for someone to bring whatever she needs." More conversation, and then Sophia was holding the phone out to him. "She wants to talk to you." "Daddy?" Emma's voice was small and scared, and it broke Daniel's heart all over again. "Hey, sweetheart. I'm okay. I just hurt my arm, and the doctors want to make sure it heals right. Can you be brave and stay with Mrs. Chen tonight? Are you really okay? You're not going to go away like Mommy did?" The question hit him like a physical blow. In his rush to save a stranger, he had almost orphaned his own daughter. The weight of that realization crashed down on him with devastating force. "I'm not going anywhere, Emma. I promise. I'll see you tomorrow, okay?" "Okay, Daddy. I love you." "I love you too, baby girl." When he hung up, Sophia was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "She sounds sweet." "She's my whole world," Daniel said simply. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was soft and thoughtful. "You risked leaving her alone to save me. Why would you do that?" Daniel had been asking himself the same question. "Because it was the right thing to do, and because..." He paused, struggling to put complex emotions into words. "Because I know what it's like to lose someone you love. I couldn't let that happen to your baby." Tears slipped down Sophia's cheeks. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about me or my situation. For all you knew, I could have deserved what was happening." Nobody deserves to be shot down in the street, Daniel said firmly. Especially not a pregnant woman. Especially not anyone. Even if I told you I was wealthy, that I live in a penthouse and drive a car that costs more than most people make in a year, even if I told you that the man who shot you was my own stepbrother trying to kill me for money. Sophia's voice was bitter now, self-recriminating. Even if I told you that my problems are the kind that money can't solve, but that most people think money should solve everything. Daniel studied her face, seeing past the expensive clothes and perfect makeup to the pain underneath. Money doesn't make you bulletproof, and it sure doesn't make you any less human. You're not what I expected, Sophia said quietly. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone who would want something in return. Someone who would see an opportunity. She looked down at her hands. Someone who would judge me for having money when things are obviously difficult for you. Daniel followed her gaze and saw his clothes, work boots with holes, jeans that had been mended multiple times, a shirt that had seen better years. In this sterile hospital room next to this elegant woman, he felt the full weight of his circumstances. But he didn't feel ashamed. He had worked for everything he had, and he had raised a beautiful daughter with love and integrity. Money doesn't make you a bad person, Daniel said, but it doesn't make you a good person either. What makes you good or bad is what you do when it matters. And what did I do when it mattered? Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You stayed, Daniel said simply. After I got shot, you could have run. You could have let the paramedics handle everything and gone back to your life. But you stayed. You've been here for 8 hours, making sure I'm okay, taking care of things I couldn't take care of. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Sophia's breath caught, and for a moment, the expensive clothes and polished exterior fell away completely, leaving just a frightened, grateful woman who had seen the best of humanity in its most unexpected form. The doctors want to keep you overnight for observation, she said, changing the subject, but not moving away from his bedside. Do you need anything? Is there anyone else I should call? There's nobody else, Daniel admitted. It's just me and Emma. The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than he had intended. He had meant it factually. There really wasn't anyone else in their lives. But Sophia seemed to hear something deeper in the statement, a loneliness that matched her own. I've arranged for your medical bills to be covered, Sophia said quietly. It's the least I can do. Daniel's first instinct was to refuse, the same pride that had made him reject Mrs. Rodriguez's suggestions about assistance. But as he looked at the IV tube in his arm, thought about the surgery, he'd just had, the medications he'd need, the physical therapy that would probably be required, he realized that pride was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when Emma needed him healthy and whole. Thank you, he said simply, and saw relief flood Sophia's face. There's something else, she said hesitantly. The construction job you were working on when you don't show up tomorrow, will they hold your position? There is no position to hold. The job ended today. The words tasted bitter in Daniel's mouth. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. I own several properties around the city. Buildings that always need maintenance, renovation, work-skilled craftsmanship. If you're interested when you're recovered, I'd like to offer you a job. I don't want charity, Daniel said, that familiar defensive wall rising up. It's not charity. I've seen your work. I made some calls while you were in surgery. Your reputation for quality and integrity is impeccable. I need someone I can trust. And after today, I know you're someone who can be trusted with anything. Daniel met her eyes, seeing sincerity there, not pity. Why are you doing this? Because you saved my life. Because you saved my baby's life. And because... She hesitated, then continued with quiet conviction. Because I have a feeling that you and Emma are going to be important to me. The words settled between them, like a promise heavy with implications neither of them was ready to examine too closely. But as evening settled over Chicago, as nurses came and went, and visiting hours drew to a close, Sophia remained by Daniel's bedside, this elegant stranger who had become something more in the space of a single day. When she finally stood to leave, her hand brushed against his, a gentle touch that sent warmth racing through his body, despite the pain medication making him drowsy. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said softly. "You don't have to." "I want to," Sophia interrupted. "I want to meet Emma. I want to make sure you're really okay. And I want to—" She paused, searching for words. "I want to understand what happened today. Why a stranger would risk everything for me. Why that stranger turned out to be exactly the person I needed to meet." After she left, Daniel lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the hospital around him. His shoulder throbbed, but it was a manageable pain, nothing compared to the ache of loneliness that had been his constant companion for 3 years. For the first time since Sarah's death, he wasn't alone. And for the first time in longer than he could remember. Daniel Hayes fell asleep with something that felt dangerously close to hope blooming in his chest. Outside his window, Chicago sparkled in the night, a city of 8 million stories, most of them unknown and untold. But somewhere in that vast urban landscape, a wealthy woman sat in her penthouse apartment, her hand resting on her growing belly, thinking about a carpenter who had changed everything with a single moment of extraordinary courage. And in a modest apartment across town, a 7-year-old girl fell asleep, clutching her father's picture, not knowing that their lives were about to transform in ways she couldn't even imagine. The bullet that was meant to end a life had instead created the beginning of something beautiful. But as with all beautiful things, it would come at a price, and the full cost of Daniel's heroism was only beginning to reveal itself. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Daniel's hospital room when Emma's voice echoed down the hallway, high and excited, cutting through the sterile quiet like music. "Daddy, Daddy, where are you?" Daniel's heart swelled as he heard Mrs. Chen's patient voice following behind, gently shushing his daughter's enthusiasm. The door burst open, and Emma flew into the room like a small tornado, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her face flushed with relief and worry. "Easy, sweetheart," Daniel said, trying to sit up straighter despite the sharp protest from his shoulder. "Daddy's okay, remember?" Emma stopped at the edge of his bed, suddenly uncertain. Her eyes were wide as she took in the bandages, the IV line, the hospital gown that made him look smaller and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "Does it hurt really bad?" "Not so bad." Daniel lied smoothly, reaching out with his good arm to stroke her hair. "And it's going to get better every day." Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. At 73, she wasn't built for chasing 7-year-olds through hospital corridors, but her affection for Emma was genuine. "She very worried," the elderly woman said in her accented English. "All night asking about Daddy." "Thank you for taking care of her," Daniel said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. Mrs. Chen had been their guardian angel more times than he could count, never asking for anything in return except the occasional help with her groceries. "No need, thank—" Mrs. Chen waved dismissively. "Emma, good girl. She helped me make dumplings, keep me company." Emma climbed carefully onto the hospital bed, curling up against Daniel's uninjured side, with the practiced ease of a child who had learned to be gentle with the one person she couldn't afford to lose. "Mrs. Chen taught me how to fold the dumpling edges so they look like little purses, and she said, You were a hero. Did she now? Daniel glanced at Mrs. Chen, who was smiling knowingly. She said, You saved a lady and her baby. Is that true, Daddy? Before Daniel could answer, there was a soft knock at the door. All three of them turned to see Sophia standing in the entrance, holding a large gift bag and looking suddenly uncertain. She was dressed more casually today, designer jeans and a soft blue sweater that complemented her dark hair, but she still looked like she belonged in a different world than this modest hospital room. I'm sorry, Sophia said quickly. I didn't realize you had visitors. I can come back later. No, please, Daniel said, noticing how Emma had gone completely still against his side, studying this beautiful stranger with the intense curiosity that only children possessed. Emma, Mrs. Chen, I'd like you to meet Sophia. She's the lady I helped yesterday. Emma's eyes went wide. You're the one with the baby. Sophia's face softened as she approached the bed. That's right. And you must be Emma. Your daddy told me so much about you. Are you really rich? Emma asked with the brutal honesty of childhood, making Daniel's face flush with embarrassment. Emma. He started to scold, but Sophia laughed, a genuine delighted sound that seemed to surprise her as much as anyone else. Yes, I suppose I am, Sophia said, sitting down in the visitor's chair so she was at Emma's eye level. But do you know what I learned yesterday? Money can't stop bullets. Money can't make someone brave enough to risk their life for a stranger. Your daddy did something that all the money in the world couldn't buy. Emma considered this seriously. Daddy says money doesn't make you happy. He says love makes you happy. Your daddy is a very smart man, Sophia said softly, her eyes meeting Daniel's over Emma's head. There was something in that look, gratitude, yes, but something deeper, more complex. Mrs. Chen, who had been observing this exchange with the sharp intelligence of someone who had lived long enough to recognize significant moments, cleared her throat. I go get coffee, let you talk, she announced diplomatically. Emma, you be good girl for Daddy. After Mrs. Chen left, Sophia opened the gift bag she'd brought. I hope you don't mind, but I brought Emma something. She pulled out a beautifully illustrated book, The Velveteen Rabbit, and a small stuffed bunny that was clearly expensive but perfectly sized for a 7-year-old's arms. Emma's eyes lit up, but she looked questioningly at her father before accepting the gifts. Daniel felt that familiar tug between pride and practicality. They couldn't afford gifts like these, but the joy on his daughter's face was priceless. What do you say, Em? He prompted gently. Thank you, Emma said solemnly, then brightened. Can you read it to me? I'd love to, Sophia said, and Daniel was struck by how natural she seemed with Emma, how the polished socialite facade melted away in the presence of his daughter's innocent enthusiasm. As Sophia began reading, her voice taking on different tones for each character, Daniel found himself studying her profile. Yesterday, in the chaos and aftermath of the shooting, he had seen her strength, her gratitude, her unexpected depth. Today, watching her patiently answer Emma's constant questions about the story, he saw something else. A loneliness that matched his own, a hunger for simple human connection that no amount of wealth could satisfy. Why does the rabbit want to be real? Emma asked, interrupting the story. Sophia paused, considering the question seriously. I think because being real means being loved so much that it changes you. It means mattering to someone in a way that nothing else can replace. Like how Daddy loves me. Exactly like that, Sophia said, her voice soft with emotion. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a warming that had nothing to do with the pain medication coursing through his system. This woman, this stranger who had entered their lives through violence and chaos, was looking at his daughter like she was something precious, something to be treasured. When the doctor arrived for his morning rounds, Emma had fallen asleep, curled against Daniel's side, the stuffed bunny clutched in her arms. Dr. Martinez was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and gentle hands, and he examined Daniel's shoulder with professional efficiency. "The surgery went well," Dr. Martinez said quietly, mindful of the sleeping child. "No nerve damage, no infection. You'll need physical therapy, and you'll have some limitations for a few weeks, but you should make a full recovery." "When can I go home?" Daniel asked. "This afternoon, as long as your pain is manageable, and you have someone to help you for the first few days. Heavy lifting, reaching overhead, those kinds of activities are off limits for at least 2 weeks." Daniel's heart sank. 2 weeks without work meant 2 weeks without income, and he was already behind on everything. As if reading his thoughts, Sophia spoke up. "I can help," she said simply. "With Emma, with whatever you need while you recover. You don't have to—" Daniel started, but Sophia cut him off with a look. "Daniel, you took a bullet for me. The least I can do is make sure you don't lose your apartment while you heal." Dr. Martinez looked between them with interest. "Are you family?" Daniel hesitated, not sure how to categorize this relationship that had formed in such an extraordinary way. "She's a friend." "A very good friend," Sophia added, and there was something in her tone that made the words feel like more than simple description. After the doctor left, they sat in comfortable quiet while Emma slept. Outside the window, Chicago hummed with its usual energy, people rushing to jobs, tourists exploring the lakefront life, continuing its relentless forward motion. But in this small room, time felt suspended, precious, and fragile. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia said eventually. "Of course." "Yesterday, when you jumped in front of that gun, was there any part of you that hesitated, any moment where you thought about Emma, about what would happen to her if—" Daniel considered the question carefully. "No," he said finally. "There wasn't time to think. I just saw you saw the gun and moved. But if I had thought about it—" He paused, stroking Emma's hair. "I think I still would have done the same thing. Even knowing you might leave her alone. Emma's going to grow up in a world where people make choices every day, some good, some bad. I want her to see that when it matters, when someone's life is on the line, you choose to help, even if it costs you something." Sophia was quiet for a long moment. "My stepbrother, the one who hired that man to kill me, he's never risked anything for anyone in his life. He's spent 35 years taking whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it. And yesterday, a man who barely makes enough money to feed his daughter risked everything for a complete stranger. What's going to happen to him, your stepbrother? The police are building a case. Marcus, that's his name. He's been making threats for months ever since my father died and left me controlling interest in the company. The man who shot you, apparently, Marcus promised him $50,000 to make me disappear before the baby was born." Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. "Before the baby was born, why does that matter?" Sophia's hand moved to her belly, that protective gesture he was beginning to recognize. "Because if something happens to me before the baby is born, Marcus inherits everything. But if the baby is born alive, he or she becomes the primary heir. Marcus saw me getting pregnant as theft of what he thought should be his." The casual cruelty of it staggered Daniel. "Your own family tried to have you murdered for money." "Money does terrible things to people," Sophia said quietly. "It makes them see dollar signs instead of human beings. It makes them forget that love and loyalty can't be bought or sold." "Is that why you don't trust people?" Why you seemed so surprised that I didn't want anything from you." Sophia smiled ruefully. "You've known me for exactly 24 hours, and you've already figured that out. Emma's good at reading people, and she's been teaching me. You have the same look she gets when she's not sure if someone is being nice because they like her or because they want something from me." The observation hit closer to home than Daniel realized. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. "It's been a long time since someone was kind to me without an agenda." Emma stirred against Daniel's side, mumbling something in her sleep. As she settled back into peaceful slumber, Daniel found himself really looking at Sophia, not as the woman he'd saved, not as the wealthy stranger who had entered their lives, but as a person. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she held herself as if always braced for the next blow, the loneliness that seemed to radiate from her, despite her obvious strength. "The baby's father," Daniel said carefully. "Is he in the picture?" Sophia's expression closed off slightly. "James died in a car accident 4 months ago. We weren't married, but we were planning to be. The baby," she touched her belly again, "the baby is all I have left of him." "I'm sorry," Daniel said, and meant it. He knew the particular agony of losing someone you planned to spend your life with, the way it left you untethered and floating in a world that suddenly made no sense. 3 years for me," he said quietly. "Cancer." Emma was 4 when Sarah died, still young enough to adapt but old enough to remember. Some days that feels like a blessing, others like a curse. "How do you do it?" Sophia asked. "How do you keep going when everything you planned, everything you dreamed about, just ends?" Daniel looked down at Emma's sleeping face, peaceful and trusting. "You find new dreams. Smaller ones maybe, but they're yours. Emma's smile when she masters something new. The satisfaction of building something with your hands. The hope that maybe tomorrow will be a little easier than today." "I don't know how to do that," Sophia admitted. "I don't know how to dream small." "Maybe you don't have to. Maybe you just need to find the right person to dream big with." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than Daniel had intended. He wasn't sure if he was talking about her future or his own, but something in Sophia's expression told him she was wondering the same thing. Mrs. Chen returned with coffee and the news that she'd spoken with Emma's school about the situation. "Teacher understand," she reported. "Say Emma can stay home today, help Daddy." "You don't have to miss work for me," Daniel told Sophia as the afternoon discharge procedures began. "I can manage. With one working arm and strict orders not to lift anything heavier than a coffee cup." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Besides, I don't exactly punch a time clock. One of the advantages of being your own boss." Emma, fully awake now and excited about the prospect of an adventure, chattered constantly as they prepared to leave the hospital. She asked Sophia endless questions about her car. "It's blue like the sky." Her house. "It's very big, but sometimes big houses can feel lonely." And whether she liked pancakes. "I love pancakes, especially ones with smiley faces." The ride to Daniel's apartment was Emma's first time in a luxury car, and her wonder was infectious. She pressed her face to the window, marveling at how quiet the engine was, how soft the leather seats felt. Sophia seemed to enjoy Emma's enthusiasm, answering every question with patience and genuine interest. But as they pulled into Daniel's neighborhood, he saw Sophia's expression change. She took in the broken streetlights, the boarded-up buildings, the group of teenagers hanging out on the corner with nothing better to do. This wasn't poverty tourism for her, this was reality, his reality, and he waited for the inevitable reaction. Instead, Sophia parked carefully and turned off the engine. "Which building?" she asked simply. Daniel's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a brick building that had seen better decades. The elevator was broken. It had been broken for 6 months, so they climbed the stairs slowly, Daniel's shoulder protesting with each step. Emma bounded ahead, proud to show off her home to their elegant visitor. "This is our place," Emma announced, throwing open the door to reveal their modest 2-bedroom apartment. Daniel saw it through Sophia's eyes, the second-hand furniture, the walls that needed painting, the careful arrangements that made the most of too little space. But he also saw what Emma saw, the photographs of Sarah scattered throughout the room, the art projects covering the refrigerator, the cozy reading corner where he and Emma spent their evenings together. "It's perfect," Sophia said quietly, and Daniel could tell she meant it. "It feels like home." "Because it is home," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Want to see my room?" As Emma dragged Sophia down the hallway, Daniel lowered himself carefully onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. The events of the past 2 days felt surreal: the shooting, the surgery, and now this beautiful, mysterious woman in his living room, treating his daughter like she was someone special. He could hear Emma's voice from her bedroom, proudly showing off her treasures, the doll Sarah had given her for her 6th birthday, the picture she'd drawn of their family, 3 figures holding hands under a yellow sun, the books they'd collected from library sales and garage sales over the years. "Daddy reads to me every night," Emma was saying, "even when he's really tired from work. And sometimes I read to him when he has bad dreams about Mommy." Daniel's throat tightened. He hadn't realized Emma knew about the nightmares. "That's very thoughtful of you." Sophia's voice was soft with emotion. "I bet that helps him feel better." "Yeah, it does. Daddy says when people love each other, they take care of each other, even when it's hard." When they returned to the living room, Sophia's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Emma immediately climbed onto the couch next to Daniel, careful of his injured shoulder. "Are you hungry?" Sophia asked. "I could order something for dinner." "We have food," Daniel said quickly, that automatic defensive response kicking in again. Sophia looked at him steadily. "I'm sure you do. But you're recovering from surgery, Emma's had a big day, and I'm hungry too. Would it be okay if I ordered pizza for all of us, as a thank you for letting me spend the day with you?" The way she phrased it, as if they were doing her a favor rather than the other way around, made it impossible for Daniel to refuse without seeming churlish. Emma's excited cheer at the mention of pizza sealed the deal. While they waited for the food to arrive, Emma entertained Sophia with a comprehensive tour of their small apartment, including a detailed explanation of their nighttime routine, their weekend adventures, trips to the park, the library, the free museum days, and their plans for Emma's upcoming 8th birthday. "What do you want for your birthday?" Sophia asked, settling on the floor next to Emma, who was showing her a puzzle they'd been working on together. "A bike," Emma said without hesitation. "A real bike, not from the thrift store, with gears and everything." Daniel felt that familiar stab of inadequacy. A new bike was beyond their budget, had been beyond their budget for Emma's last 3 birthdays. He'd been watching garage sales and online listings, hoping to find something decent and affordable, but so far no luck. "What color bike?" Sophia asked, as if new bikes were perfectly reasonable birthday gifts. "Purple, or maybe blue, or pink." Emma's eyes were bright with dreaming. "Daddy says maybe next year when he gets a better job." "Next year sounds perfect," Sophia said diplomatically, catching Daniel's warning look. The pizza arrived, more food than they could possibly eat, along with garlic bread and salad that Daniel suspected they hadn't ordered. As they sat around his small kitchen table, Emma chattering between bites, and Sophia asking questions that showed she was genuinely listening, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years: the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with another adult who cared about his daughter. After dinner, Emma's energy finally began to flag. Bath time was usually Daniel's job, but with his limited mobility, Sophia volunteered to help. Daniel listened to their voices from the bathroom, Emma's constant chatter, and Sophia's patient responses, and realized this was the first time since Sarah's death that Emma had experienced feminine attention from someone other than Mrs. Chen. When Emma emerged in her pajamas, her hair still damp and smelling like the expensive shampoo Sophia had somehow produced from her purse, she looked sleepy and content. Story time was another adjustment. Daniel couldn't hold a book and turn pages with his arm in a sling, so Sophia read while Daniel and Emma cuddled on the couch. She chose The Velveteen Rabbit, the book she'd brought earlier, and her voice took on the same magical quality it had in the hospital. As the story unfolded about love making things real, about the transformative power of being truly seen and valued, Daniel found himself watching Sophia's face in the soft lamplight. When had she become beautiful to him, not just objectively attractive, which she obviously was, but beautiful in the way that mattered, the kind of beauty that came from kindness, from strength, from the way she made his daughter feel special and cherished. "Will you read to me tomorrow night too?" Emma asked as Sophia closed the book. "If your daddy says it's okay, and if you want me to," Sophia replied carefully. Emma looked at Daniel with hopeful eyes. "Can she, Daddy, please?" Daniel met Sophia's gaze over Emma's head. There was a question there, one that went beyond simple babysitting arrangements. She was asking if he was willing to let her into their carefully constructed world, if he trusted her enough to become part of their routine, their lives. "We'll see, sweetheart," Daniel said finally. "Now give me a hug and get to bed." Emma's goodnight hugs were legendary, enthusiastic, prolonged, and delivered with the fierce intensity of a child who had learned that every goodbye might be permanent. Tonight, to Daniel's surprise, she turned to Sophia with shy anticipation. "Can I hug you too?" "I would love that," Sophia said, opening her arms. Watching his daughter embrace this woman who had been a stranger 48 hours ago, Daniel felt his carefully maintained emotional walls begin to crack. Emma was a good judge of character, better than he was sometimes, and she had clearly decided that Sophia was safe, worthy of trust and affection. After Emma was settled in her bed, Daniel and Sophia sat in the living room's comfortable quiet. The medication was making him drowsy, but he wasn't ready for this day to end, wasn't ready for Sophia to leave and return to her world of penthouses and privilege. "Thank you," he said simply. "For today, for everything. Emma hasn't been this happy since her mother died," Sophia finished quietly. "Yeah. It's been just the two of us for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to have help, to have someone else care about her. She's an extraordinary little girl. Smart, kind, resilient. You're raising her beautifully." "I'm trying. Some days I feel like I'm failing her, like she deserves more than I can give her." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something? About wealth, about privilege, about all the things people think matter?" Daniel nodded. "I grew up in a mansion with 7 bedrooms and 4 cars in the garage. I had nannies and tutors and every advantage money could buy. But I never had what Emma has." "What's that?" "A parent who would rather read her bedtime stories than attend charity galas. A parent who knows her favorite foods and her worst fears and the exact way to make her laugh when she's sad. A parent who loves her so much that he'd take a bullet for a stranger just to make the world a little safer for his daughter." Sophia's voice was thick with emotion. "Money can buy a lot of things, Daniel, but it can't buy what you've given Emma. It can't buy love that puts someone else first always and without question." The words hit Daniel harder than he expected. For 3 years, he'd measured himself against an impossible standard, what Sarah would have wanted for Emma, what other parents could provide, what Emma deserved, versus what he could afford. But sitting here, seeing himself through Sophia's eyes, He began to understand that maybe love really was enough. Maybe it had always been enough. "What happens now?" Daniel asked quietly. "After everything that's happened after today, what happens next?" Sophia looked at him in the soft lamplight, her face open and vulnerable in a way he suspected few people ever saw. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've spent my whole life having plans, knowing exactly where I was going and how I was going to get there. But yesterday changed everything. You changed everything. How? You showed me what real courage looks like, what real love looks like, and you made me realize that I've been living my life all wrong, focused on protecting what I have instead of figuring out what actually matters." They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between them. Outside, Chicago settled into its nighttime rhythm. But inside this small apartment, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances contemplated a future that neither of them had imagined just days before. When Sophia finally stood to leave, Daniel walked her to the door, despite his protesting shoulder. At the threshold, she turned back to him, her expression serious. "Daniel, I need you to know something. What I feel for you for Emma, it's not gratitude. It's not some kind of rescue fantasy or rich woman's guilt. It's," she searched for words, "it's recognition. Like I've been waiting my whole life to find you, and I just didn't know it until you literally threw yourself between me and death." Before Daniel could respond, before he could process the magnitude of what she was saying, Sophia stood on her toes and kissed him softly on the cheek. Her lips were warm against his skin, and she smelled like expensive perfume and hope. "I'll see you tomorrow," she whispered. And then she was gone, leaving Daniel standing in his doorway, with his heart pounding and his world tilted completely off its axis. That night, as he lay in his bed listening to Emma's peaceful breathing, through the thin walls, Daniel stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. 2 days ago, he had been a struggling single father, with more problems than solutions, barely keeping his head above water, in a world that seemed designed to drown people like him. Now, impossibly, he was something else entirely, a hero, a friend, and perhaps, though he barely dared to think it, a man who might be falling in love with a woman who seemed to see something in him that he'd never seen in himself. 3 weeks later, Daniel woke to the sound of Emma's laughter drifting through the apartment walls, a sound that had become as regular as sunrise since Sophia had entered their lives. The physical therapy sessions were paying off. His shoulder moved with less pain each day, though the doctor had warned him it would be months before he regained full strength. What surprised him more was how quickly his heart had healed from wounds he hadn't even realized were still bleeding. "Daddy, Sophia's here," Emma called from the kitchen, where the rich aroma of real coffee, not the instant kind Daniel usually made, filled the air. He found them at his small table, Emma chattering animatedly, while Sophia listened with the kind of focused attention that made his daughter bloom like a flower in sunlight. Sophia had taken to arriving early most mornings, claiming she was an early riser anyway. But Daniel suspected she simply wanted to share these quiet moments before the day pulled them in different directions. "How's the shoulder feeling?" Sophia asked, looking up at him with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his appearance, searching for signs of pain or discomfort. "Better every day," Daniel said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, a brief contact that still sent electricity racing through his system, despite its increasing frequency. "Dr. Martinez wants to see you next week for another checkup," Sophia said, consulting the small notebook where she'd taken to tracking his medical appointments, Emma's school events, and a dozen other details that made their life run smoother. "And I scheduled your first job consultation for Friday afternoon if you're feeling up to it." The job renovating 2 floors of office space in one of Sophia's downtown buildings represented more than just work. It was independence, the chance to prove that he could provide for Emma without charity, even if the line between business arrangement and personal kindness had become increasingly blurred. "Tell me again about the purple bike," Emma said, returning to her favorite topic of conversation, as she worked on a coloring book that was far more sophisticated than anything Daniel could have afforded. Sophia smiled, playing along with the game they'd developed. "Well, it would have to be the exact right shade of purple. Not too light, not too dark, and definitely with silver streamers from the handlebars. And a basket. Of course a basket. How else would you carry your treasures?" Daniel watched this exchange with a mixture of joy and trepidation. Emma's birthday was still 2 months away, but the bike had become a symbol of possibility, of dreams that might actually come true. He wanted to believe in those dreams, but experience had taught him that happiness was fragile, that circumstances could change without warning. "I should get going," Sophia said, standing and gathering her purse. "Board meeting at 10. She bent to kiss Emma's forehead, a gesture that had evolved naturally over the past weeks, then moved toward Daniel. The goodbye kiss had started innocently enough, a peck on the cheek, similar to that first night. But somewhere in the accumulation of days, it had migrated to the corner of his mouth, lingering just long enough to make them both acutely aware of what they weren't quite ready to acknowledge. "I'll pick Emma up from school," Sophia asked, her lips still close enough to his that he could feel her breath. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said firmly, a phrase that had become her standard response to his protests. "Besides, we're going to look at paint samples for her room, remember?" Emma had mentioned wanting to redecorate, and somehow that casual comment had evolved into a full renovation project that Sophia had enthusiastically embraced. Daniel had tried to object, the room was fine as it was, but Emma's excitement had worn down his resistance. After Sophia left, Daniel helped Emma get ready for school, marveling at how their morning routine had expanded to accommodate longer conversations, more elaborate hairstyles and clothes that actually fit properly. Sophia's influence was evident in dozens of small ways: fresh flowers on the kitchen table, groceries that appeared in their refrigerator. Without discussion, Emma's backpack, which had mysteriously been replaced with a newer, sturdier version. The walk to school took them past the construction site where Daniel had worked before the shooting. Tony Morrison was there supervising the crew, and he waved them over. "Hayes, is good to see you vertical," Tony said with genuine warmth. "How's the shoulder?" "Getting stronger. Should be ready for full work in another few weeks." "Good, because I've got a project coming up that could use your touch. Historic renovation downtown, lots of custom millwork." Tony's expression grew curious. "Though I hear you might be tied up with other opportunities." Daniel felt Emma's hand tighten in his. News traveled fast in the construction community, and his association with Sophia had apparently become common knowledge. "Nothing's set in stone," Daniel said carefully. "Word is you saved some rich lady's life and now she's taking care of you." Tony's tone was neutral, but Daniel could hear the question underneath. "Something like that." "Well, whatever the arrangement, you're a good man, Hayes, and that little girl of yours is lucky to have you." Tony ruffled Emma's hair affectionately. "You call me when you're ready to get back to real work." As they continued toward school, Emma was unusually quiet. Finally, she looked up at him with serious eyes. "Daddy, is Sophia taking care of us because she feels sorry for us?" The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. "Why would you ask that, sweetheart? Some kids at school said rich people only help poor people to make themselves feel better. They said Sophia probably thinks we're charity cases." Daniel stopped walking and knelt down to Emma's level, ignoring the protest from his healing shoulder. Look at me. Do you think Sophia spends time with us because she feels sorry for us? Emma considered this seriously. No, I think she likes us. I think she's lonely, and we make her happy. I think you're exactly right. And do you know how I know? How? Because you can't fake the way she looks at you when you're not watching. You can't fake how excited she gets about things like paint colors and bedtime stories. People don't spend that much time and energy on something they don't genuinely care about. Emma nodded, satisfied with this explanation. Plus, she laughs at my jokes even when they're not funny. That's definitely a sign of true affection, Daniel agreed, smiling. But as he watched Emma run into school, Tony's words echoed in his mind. Rich lady taking care of him. The phrase stung because it contained just enough truth to be dangerous. He was dependent on Sophia now in ways that went beyond the medical bills she'd paid or the job opportunities she'd created. Emma had come to expect her presence to count on her consistency in ways that terrified Daniel when he let himself think about it. What happened when Sophia got tired of playing house with them? What happened when the novelty wore off? When the realities of single parenthood and financial struggle became tedious rather than charming? What happened when she met someone from her own world? Someone who could offer her the kind of life she was accustomed to. These thoughts occupied Daniel's mind as he made his way to the physical therapy appointment. The clinic was in a better part of town, the kind of place where the magazines were current, and the waiting room didn't smell like desperation. It was also expensive, the kind of expensive that would have bankrupted him if Sophia hadn't insisted on handling the costs. You're making excellent progress, his therapist Janet announced after putting him through a series of exercises. Range of motion is nearly back to normal, and your strength is improving faster than we expected. When can I get back to real work? Heavy lifting overhead, reaching that kind of thing. Another month, maybe 6 weeks if you keep up with the exercises. Janet studied his chart. Though I have to ask, are you planning to return to construction work full-time? The question surprised him. Why wouldn't I? Construction is hard on the body under the best circumstances. After an injury like yours, you might want to consider alternatives. Office work, consulting, something that doesn't require the same physical demands. Daniel almost laughed. I'm a carpenter, not an executive. Physical work is what I do. I'm just saying you have options now. Not everyone gets a second chance to change direction. As Daniel left the clinic, Janet's words joined the chorus of voices in his head. Options, second chances, change direction. It seemed everyone had opinions about his life. Now suggestions about what he should do with the opportunities that had fallen into his lap through violence and chance. The job site Sophia had mentioned was only a few blocks away, so Daniel decided to walk over and get a look at what he'd be working with. The building was classic Chicago architecture, red brick and limestone built in the 1920s, when craftsmanship meant something. The interior renovation would require someone who understood both modern efficiency and historic preservation. He was studying the building's facade when his phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Emergency at office. Can you pick up Emma today? I'm so sorry. Daniel's first thought was concern for Sophia, followed immediately by the practical realization that he didn't have a car. He'd been depending on public transportation and Sophia's rides for weeks now. The independence he'd been slowly rebuilding suddenly felt fragile again. The bus ride to Emma's school took 45 minutes, and he arrived to find her waiting, with the after-school supervisor, the only child left in the pickup area. Her face lit up when she saw him, but Daniel felt the familiar sting of inadequacy. Other parents had reliable transportation, flexible schedules, backup plans that didn't involve their 7-year-old waiting alone. Where's Sophia? Emma asked as they waited for the bus back home. She had to work late. It's just us tonight. Emma accepted this without complaint, but Daniel could see her disappointment. Over the past weeks, Sophia had become as much a part of Emma's routine as he was. The thought of what would happen if that consistency disappeared made Daniel's chest tight with anxiety. They were halfway home when Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, look." Daniel followed her gaze to see a familiar figure sitting on a bus stop bench across the street. Marcus Whitmore. Sophia's stepbrother was watching them with the kind of focused intensity that made Daniel's protective instincts flare to life. "Do you know that man?" Emma asked, sensing the tension in Daniel's body. "No, sweetheart. Just keep walking." But Daniel memorized every detail of Marcus's appearance, the expensive suit, the cold eyes, the way he seemed to be cataloging their routine just as Daniel was cataloging his. When they reached their apartment building, Daniel looked back to see Marcus writing something in a small notebook before walking away. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel called Sophia. She answered on the first ring, her voice strained with exhaustion. "Daniel, I'm so sorry about today. The lawyers kept us in meetings until after 6, and by the time I realized—" "It's fine," Daniel interrupted. Emma understood. "But Sophia, we need to talk." "What's wrong?" "You sound upset." Daniel hesitated, not wanting to alarm her, but unable to shake the feeling that Marcus's presence near Emma's school was more than coincidence. "I saw your stepbrother today, near the school." Silence stretched across the connection. When Sophia spoke again, her voice was sharp with fear. "Are you sure it was him?" "Tall, dark hair, expensive suit. He was watching us." "Oh God." Sophia's breathing became rapid, panicked. "Daniel, you and Emma need to stay away from your usual routine tomorrow. Don't go to the school. Don't go anywhere predictable." "What aren't you telling me?" Another pause, longer this time. "The lawyers think Marcus might be planning something. The case against him for the shooting is stronger than his attorneys expected, and desperate people do desperate things." "What kind of something?" "They're not sure. But Daniel, if he can't get to me directly, he might try to hurt people I care about. He might try to hurt you and Emma." And the words hit Daniel like ice water. "You think he'd go after Emma?" "I don't know, but I can't take that chance. I'm hiring security for you bodyguards." "No." Daniel's voice was firm. "I won't have my daughter living in fear, surrounded by strangers with guns." "Then what do you suggest? Because I will not let anything happen to either of you, not when it's my fault you're in danger." Daniel was quiet for a moment, thinking. "What if we left town for a while, just until the trial is over, until Marcus is dealt with? Where would you go, Ma?" "I don't know, huh? Somewhere quiet, somewhere he wouldn't think to look." Daniel paused, then made a option that surprised him. "Come with us." "What?" "You said yourself that he's targeting people you care about. That makes you a target too. So come with us. We'll find somewhere safe, somewhere we can all disappear for a while." "Daniel, I can't just abandon my responsibilities. The company, the legal proceedings. What good are your responsibilities if you're dead?" The words came out harsher than he intended, but they had the desired effect. Sophia fell silent. "There's something else," she said finally. "Something I haven't told you about Marcus, about why he's so determined to stop me." "What?" "The baby I'm carrying. If it's born alive, it doesn't just inherit my father's estate. It inherits his company, his properties, everything. But there's a clause in the will that if I die before the baby is born, or if the baby doesn't survive, Marcus gets it all." Daniel felt cold understanding wash over him. "So he's not just trying to kill you. He's trying to kill the baby too. And anyone who might protect us." Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. Daniel, I should never have gotten involved with you and Emma. I should have stayed away after you saved me. Now I've put you both in danger. Don't, Daniel said firmly. Don't you dare blame yourself for caring about people. Marcus is the one who's chosen violence. Marcus is the one who's decided that money is worth more than human life. You didn't create this situation. But I made it worse by falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, unplanned and raw. Daniel's heart stopped, then began beating double time. Sophia, I know it's complicated. I know this isn't how these things are supposed to happen. Rich women aren't supposed to fall in love with the men who saved them, and single fathers aren't supposed to get involved with pregnant widows whose families want them dead. But Daniel, I can't pretend anymore that this is just gratitude or that you're just a friend. Daniel closed his eyes, letting her words wash over him. You're not the only one who's stopped pretending. What does that mean? It means I love you too. And I love the baby you're carrying, even though I've never met him or her. And it means I'm terrified that loving you is going to get Emma hurt. Sophia was crying now. He could hear it in her voice. So what do? We protect each other, Daniel said simply. We find somewhere safe and we figure out how to build a life together that doesn't involve looking over our shoulders every day. And if Marcus finds us, then we deal with it together. But Sophia, I need you to understand something. If it comes down to a choice between your safety and Emma's, I will choose Emma. I have to choose Emma. I know, Sophia said quietly, and I love you more for that, not less. They talked for another hour, making plans that felt both desperate and hopeful. Sophia would arrange for a house somewhere remote. She had properties in several states, places Marcus wouldn't know about. Daniel would withdraw Emma from school temporarily, tell Toni Morrison he needed an extended leave. They would disappear together until the legal system could deal with Marcus permanently. The next morning, Daniel sat Emma down for the conversation he'd been dreading. Em, how would you feel about taking a vacation somewhere new, somewhere we could explore together? Emma's eyes lit up with excitement. Like where? Maybe the mountains, or near a lake, somewhere quiet and beautiful. Would Sophia come too? Daniel's heart clenched at the hope in his daughter's voice. Would you like her to? Yes, and the baby too when it comes. The baby. Emma nodded seriously. Sophia told me about the baby. She said it might need extra people to love it since its daddy went to heaven like Mommy did. Daniel marveled at his daughter's capacity for acceptance for love that expanded to include whoever needed it. And you'd be okay with that, having a baby around? I think I'd be a good big sister, Emma said thoughtfully. I could teach the baby things like how to tie shoes and what stories are the best. I think you'd be an excellent big sister. Emma climbed into his lap, careful of his healing shoulder. Daddy, are we going to be a family? You and me and Sophia and the baby? The question was so direct, so hopeful, that Daniel felt tears sting his eyes. Would you want that more than anything? Even more than a purple bike? Daniel hugged his daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid weight of her trust and love. Outside Chicago hummed with its usual energy, unaware that in this small apartment, a carpenter and his daughter were planning to risk everything on the possibility of love. That afternoon, Sophia arrived with news that made their plans feel more urgent than ever. Marcus had been asking questions around the city about Daniel's work history, Emma's school, their daily routines. He was building a profile, preparing for something. How long do we have? Daniel asked. Not long, maybe a day or two before he makes his move. Sophia's face was pale but determined. I've found us a place. A cabin in Wisconsin near Lake Superior. Its remote off the grid registered under a trust he won't be able to trace. What about your work, the legal case? My lawyers can handle the day-to-day proceedings. And Daniel, there's something else. Something that might change everything. She pulled out a thick envelope legal documents that she spread across his kitchen table. If something happens to me, I want you and Emma to be protected. I've had papers drawn up, guardianship documents for the baby life insurance policies, with you as the beneficiary trust funds for Emma's education. Daniel stared at the papers, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was offering. Sophia, I can't. Yes, you can. Because if Marcus succeeds, if something happens to me, I need to know that you'll take care of my baby. I need to know that this child will be raised by someone who understands what love actually means. And if nothing happens, if we get through this and Marcus goes to prison and you have your baby safely. Sophia reached across the table and took his hand. Then we figure out how to blend two broken lives into something whole. We teach Emma how to be a big sister, and we teach this baby how to be part of a family that chooses love over everything else. That evening, as they packed their few belongings and prepared to disappear into the wilderness of Wisconsin, Daniel found himself thinking about choices. 3 weeks ago, his choice to save a stranger had seemed simple, instinctive, the obvious thing to do when someone's life was in danger. Now he understood that choice had been just the beginning. Every day since then had brought new choices to trust, to hope, to risk his heart and Emma's future on a love that defied logic and circumstance. Tonight, they were making perhaps the biggest choice of all, to stand together against forces that wanted to tear them apart, to bet everything on the possibility that love could triumph over greed and violence. As they loaded Sophia's car in the darkness, Emma sleeping peacefully in the back seat with her stuffed bunny, Daniel felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He was no longer just protecting his daughter. He was protecting the woman he loved and the child she carried, building a family from the ashes of tragedy and the hope of tomorrow. The city lights of Chicago faded behind them as they drove north, leaving behind everything familiar and safe for the unknown dangers and possibilities that lay ahead. But as Sophia's hand found his across the center console, warm and steady and sure, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death, the absolute certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. In the back seat, Emma stirred and mumbled something about purple bikes and baby bottles, her dreams mixing past and future into a tapestry of hope. And in that moment, as they drove through the darkness toward an uncertain dawn, Daniel Hayes knew that every choice he'd made from that first desperate leap in front of a stranger's gun to this midnight flight toward love and safety had been leading them here to this car, this family, this chance at happiness that was worth any risk. The road stretched ahead, dark and unknown, but for the first time in years, Daniel wasn't afraid of what might be waiting in the distance. He had everything that mattered right here with him, and that was enough to face whatever storm was coming. The cabin emerged from the Wisconsin darkness like something from a fairy tale, all weathered cedar and stone nestled among towering pines that whispered secrets to the wind. Lake Superior stretched beyond the trees, its waters black as ink under the star-scattered sky. As Daniel carried a sleeping Emma from the car, her small body warm against his chest, he felt the first stirring of something he hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of peace. "It's perfect," Sophia whispered, her voice filled with wonder as she took in the rustic beauty of their temporary sanctuary. "I'd forgotten how quiet the world could be." The cabin was larger than it had appeared from the outside, with 3 bedrooms, a stone fireplace that dominated the living room, and windows that framed the lake like living paintings. Emma woke as Daniel tucked her into bed in a room that smelled like pine and possibilities, her eyes wide with sleepy excitement. Are we really here, Daddy? Is this really ours? For now, sweetheart. For as long as we need it to be. Emma's small hand found his in the darkness. I like it here. It feels safe. Daniel kissed her forehead, marveling at his daughter's intuitive understanding of sanctuary. Sleep now, Em. Tomorrow, we'll explore everything. When he returned to the living room, he found Sophia standing at the window overlooking the lake, her silhouette outlined by moonlight. She had changed into comfortable clothes, jeans, and a soft sweater that emphasized her growing belly, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked completely relaxed. Thank you, she said as he approached. For what? For coming with me. For trusting me enough to uproot your life, Emma's life, on nothing more than my word that this was necessary. Daniel moved to stand beside her, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. Your word is enough. You've proven that over and over. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the lake's surface ripple in the gentle breeze. The distance between them felt charged with possibility, with all the things they'd acknowledged but hadn't yet fully explored. Daniel, Sophia said softly, turning to face him. Earlier on the phone when I said I loved you, I meant what I said too, he interrupted gently. Every word. I know this is complicated. I know the timing is terrible, and I know there are a dozen reasons why this shouldn't work. But I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is gratitude or friendship or anything that simple. Her voice grew stronger, more certain. I love you. I love Emma. And I want us to be a family if you'll have us. Daniel reached up to cup her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. Sophia, I've been alone for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to hope for more than just survival. You've given me that back. You've given Emma that back. And you've given me something I never had, a love that isn't conditional on what I can provide or how I can be useful. You love me for who I am, not what I have. When Daniel kissed her, it was with 3 weeks of restrained longing, of careful distance finally collapsing into honest emotion. Her lips were soft and warm, and she tasted like hope and promises. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Sophia's eyes were bright with tears. I've never felt this way before, she whispered. Even with James, it was never like this. Like what? Like coming home. Like finding the missing piece of myself I didn't know I was looking for. They spent the rest of the evening talking quietly by the fireplace, sharing stories and dreams and fears with the kind of intimacy that felt both new and ancient. Sophia told him about her childhood, the loneliness of growing up wealthy, but emotionally neglected, the way money had isolated her from genuine human connection. Daniel shared memories of Sarah, of the life he'd built and lost, of the man he'd been before grief and responsibility had worn him down to his essential elements. Do you think she would have liked me? Sophia asked, her hand resting on Daniel's chest as they lay together on the couch, not quite ready to address the sleeping arrangements, but unwilling to be apart. Sarah? Daniel considered the question seriously. She would have loved you. She always said she could tell a person's character by how they treated children and animals. The way you are with Emma, the way you listen to her, like her thoughts matter, Sarah would have seen that and known exactly who you are. I hope the baby turns out like Emma, strong and kind and full of joy despite everything that's happened. Tell me about the baby, Daniel said quietly. What do you hope for? Sophia's hand moved to her belly, that instinctive protective gesture he'd come to recognize. I hope for a child who knows they're wanted, who grows up feeling secure and loved. I hope for someone who has Emma's courage and your integrity, and maybe a little of James's humor. And what about from you? What will this baby get from their mother? Stubbornness, Sophia said with a small laugh. Determination, and hopefully the wisdom to know that love is more valuable than any inheritance. They slept together that night, not as lovers yet, but as two people who had found in each other a harbor against the storms of the world. Daniel held Sophia, carefully mindful of her pregnancy, and she curled against him with a trust that humbled him. For the first time in 3 years, he slept without nightmares. Morning brought Emma's delighted discovery of the cabin's wonders, a loft accessible by ladder windows that cranked open to let in the sound of lapping waves, and a kitchen with a view that made her gasp with pleasure. Sophia made pancakes while Daniel and Emma explored the property, and the simple domesticity of it felt both miraculous and natural. "Look, Daddy," Emma called from the shoreline, where she'd discovered smooth stones perfect for skipping. "The water goes on forever." "Not quite forever," Daniel said, joining her at the water's edge. "But pretty close. Can we stay here always, even after the bad man isn't trying to hurt Sophia anymore?" The question caught Daniel off guard. He'd been so focused on the immediate danger that he hadn't allowed himself to think about what came after. "Would you want to stay here always?" Emma nodded emphatically. "It's like the stories you read me about places where families go to be happy. And Sophia could have her baby here, and we could teach it how to swim and how to find the best rocks." "What about your friends in Chicago? What about Mrs. Chen?" Emma's expression grew thoughtful. "I'd miss them, but Daddy, I think maybe some things are more important than staying in the same place, like being together. Like being safe." The wisdom in his 7-year-old daughter's words struck Daniel like a physical blow. Emma had already lost one mother. Perhaps her eagerness to embrace this new life was driven by the understanding that happiness was fragile, that when you found it, you held on tight. They spent the morning settling in, unpacking their few belongings, familiarizing themselves with the cabin's quirks, establishing routines that felt both temporary and potentially permanent. Sophia worked from her laptop handling business that couldn't wait, while Daniel and Emma explored every inch of their temporary kingdom. It was just after lunch when Sophia's phone rang with news that shattered their peaceful morning. "They lost him," she said after hanging up, her face pale with fear. "Marcus posted bail somehow, and he's disappeared. His ankle monitor was found cut off in a Chicago alley this morning." Daniel felt ice form in his stomach. "How is that possible? Attempted murder charges." "Money," Sophia said bitterly. "Enough money can buy almost anything, including freedom for a man who should be locked away. What do the police think he'll do? They don't know. But Daniel, if he's desperate enough to run, if he's willing to become a fugitive, then he's capable of anything." Emma, who had been playing quietly with her new coloring books, looked up with the intuitive sensitivity that children possessed. "Is the bad man coming here?" "We don't know, sweetheart," Daniel said, kneeling beside her chair. "But even if he tries, we're safe here. No one knows where we are." But even as he spoke the reassuring words, Daniel felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. They were isolated here, miles from help, dependent on their anonymity for protection. If Marcus had resources enough to disappear from police custody, did he have resources enough to track them down? The answer came sooner than any of them expected. That afternoon, while Emma napped and Sophia worked on her laptop, Daniel was splitting firewood behind the cabin when he noticed movement in the tree line. At first, he dismissed it as wildlife. Deer were common in these woods, along with smaller creatures that thrived in the wilderness. But something about the movement felt wrong, too deliberate, too purposeful. He set down the axe and moved closer, his construction-honed instincts alert to danger. Through the trees, he caught a glimpse of dark clothing, the flash of something metallic. Someone was watching the cabin, someone who clearly didn't belong in this peaceful wilderness. Daniel retreated carefully, not wanting to alert the watcher to his discovery. Inside, he found Sophia at the kitchen table, her laptop open, her expression focused on whatever crisis was demanding her attention. "We have a problem," he said quietly, not wanting to wake Emma. Sophia looked up immediately, reading the tension in his voice. "What kind of problem?" "Someone's watching the cabin. In the trees to the north, maybe 100 yards out." The color drained from Sophia's face. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. We need to get Emma and get out of here. Now." But even as Daniel spoke, he heard the sound that made his blood turn to ice, the distant rumble of vehicles approaching on the narrow road that led to their sanctuary. Multiple vehicles moving fast, getting closer. "It's too late," Sophia whispered, understanding immediately. "He found us." Daniel's mind raced through options, scenarios, possible escape routes. The cabin was surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides, with the lake providing the only other avenue of approach. If Marcus had found them, if he'd brought help, then they were effectively trapped. "Wake Emma," Daniel said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Pack only what we absolutely need. We're going out the back through the woods." "Daniel, I'm 6 months pregnant. I can't run through the forest." "You won't have to run. But we can't stay here." The sound of vehicles was getting closer, and Daniel could see dust rising through the trees. At least 2 cars, maybe 3, carrying people who had tracked them across 2 states with a determination that spoke of serious money and serious intent. Emma woke easily, her sleep-tousled hair framing a face that immediately registered the tension in the adults around her. "What's wrong?" "We need to go for a little hike," Daniel said, forcing calmness into his voice. "Remember the game we used to play about being explorers?" Emma nodded, fully awake now and trusting her father's leadership, even in circumstances she didn't understand. They gathered what they could carry: water, some food, warm clothes, Sophia's phone, and slipped out the cabin's back door just as the first vehicle pulled into the clearing out front. Through the trees, Daniel could see men getting out of expensive SUVs, men in dark clothes who moved with military precision. "This way," Daniel whispered, leading them deeper into the forest, away from the lake, away from the cabin, into the green twilight of the Wisconsin wilderness. Behind them, he heard voices, the sound of the cabin's front door being forced open, shouts of frustration when they discovered their quarry had flown. They had maybe a 10-minute head start before the search began in earnest. The forest was thick with undergrowth, and their progress was slower than Daniel would have liked. Sophia moved carefully, one hand on her belly, the other gripping Emma's to keep her close. They followed what might have been a deer trail, heading generally west, away from the road, but parallel to the lake. "Where are we going?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "Somewhere safe," Daniel replied, though he had no idea where that might be. His knowledge of these woods was limited to what he could see from the cabin, and night was still hours away. They had been walking for perhaps 20 minutes when they heard the dogs. The baying echoed through the trees like something from a nightmare, the sound of hunting hounds on a fresh scent. Marcus hadn't just brought men, he'd brought a tracking team, professional hunters, who could follow a trail through wilderness that would confound amateurs. "Daniel," Sophia's voice was tight with fear. "I can't outrun dogs." Daniel looked at the woman he loved, heavy with pregnancy, and the daughter who was everything to him, and felt a familiar coldness settle in his chest. It was the same feeling he'd had on that Chicago street corner, the absolute clarity that came when protecting others mattered more than protecting yourself. "You won't have to," he said quietly. "There's a stream about half a mile ahead. I saw it from the cabin this morning. Water will confuse the scent trail. You and Emma follow it downstream until you find a place to hide." "What about you?" "I'm going to buy you time." Sophia's eyes widened with understanding and horror. "No, Daniel, no, we stay together. If we stay together, they catch all of us. If I draw them off, you and Emma have a chance." "Daddy, I'm scared," Emma whispered, pressing close to his leg. Daniel knelt down and took his daughter's face in his hands. "Remember what I told you about being brave, Em. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing, even when you are scared. I don't want you to go away like Mommy did." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "I'm not going away, sweetheart. I'm just going to make sure the bad men don't follow us. But I need you to take care of Sophia and the baby, okay? Can you be my brave girl and help them get somewhere safe?" Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face, but her jaw set with determination that reminded Daniel powerfully of Sarah. "I love you," Daniel said, kissing her forehead. "More than all the stars in the sky. Don't ever forget that." He turned to Sophia, who was crying openly now. "Take care of her. If something happens to me—" "Nothing is going to happen to you," Sophia said fiercely. "We're all getting out of this together." "Maybe. But if we don't, I need you to know that these past weeks have been the happiest of my life since Sarah died. You gave me back hope, Sophia. You gave me back love." He kissed her, then hard and desperate, pouring 3 weeks of emotion into what might be their last moment together. When they broke apart, both were crying. "I love you," Sophia whispered. "Come back to us." "I'll try." Daniel watched them disappear into the forest, the woman carrying his heart and his future, and the little girl who was his entire world. Then he turned back toward the sound of approaching dogs and men, toward a confrontation he might not survive, but that would give them the time they needed to escape. The stream was exactly where he remembered it, a clear ribbon of water that would carry away scent trails and confusion to the hunters following them. Daniel waded into the water and began moving upstream, back toward the cabin, back toward the men who wanted to destroy everything good that had entered his life. He didn't have a plan beyond drawing them away from Sophia and Emma. He had no weapons, no training in combat, nothing but determination and the desperate love of a man who would sacrifice anything to protect his family. It should have been hopeless. But as Daniel Hayes moved through the Wisconsin wilderness, he felt something he hadn't expected: peace. Not resignation, but the deep calm that came from knowing exactly who you were and what you stood for. He was a protector, a provider, a man who put others before himself without question or hesitation. On a Chicago street corner 3 weeks ago, he had made the choice to risk everything for a stranger. Now in these ancient woods, he was making the same choice for the people he loved most in the world. The dogs were getting closer, their baying more excited as they picked up his trail. Daniel could hear men's voices, two coordinating the search, closing in on their quarry with professional efficiency. When they found him standing waist-deep in the stream, with his hand raised in surrender, Marcus Whitmore was among them. He was younger than Daniel had expected, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of entitled handsomeness that came from Wakoto genetics and better grooming. But his eyes were cold, calculating, empty of anything that resembled human compassion. "Where is she?" Marcus demanded without preamble. "Gone," Daniel said simply. "Somewhere you'll never find her." Marcus nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward, and struck Daniel across the face with casual violence. Daniel's head snapped back, blood flowing from his split lip, but he remained standing. "I'll ask again. Where is my sister, stepsister?" Daniel corrected, spitting blood. "And like I said, gone." Another blow, this one to his stomach, doubling him over in the stream. But Daniel's mind was clear, focused on one simple fact every minute he kept. Their attention was another minute for Sophia and Emma to get further away. "You know what's funny?" Marcus said conversationally as his men dragged Daniel from the stream. "3 weeks ago, I didn't even know you existed. Now you're the single biggest obstacle to everything I've worked toward my entire life." "Sorry to disappoint you," Daniel gasped. "Oh, you haven't disappointed me. You've actually been quite useful. Did you really think I couldn't track financial transactions? Hospital bills, property rentals, credit card purchases. Sophia's been leaving a trail of breadcrumbs everywhere she's helped you." Daniel felt ice form in his stomach. If Marcus had been tracking them through financial records, then their escape might have been futile from the beginning. "The cabin was just the latest stop on a very predictable journey," Marcus continued. "A rich woman playing house with her charity case boyfriend and his adorable little daughter. It would be touching if it weren't so pathetic." "At least she knows how to love someone," Daniel said quietly. "At least she's not so broken inside that money is the only thing that matters to her." Marcus's expression darkened. "Love. You think this is about love? She's using you, you fool. Rich women like Sophia collect men like you, the way other people collect stray cats, temporarily entertaining, ultimately disposable. You're wrong." "Am I? Then where is she now? If she loved you so much, why did she abandon you here to face the consequences of her choices?" Daniel met Marcus's eyes steadily. "Because I asked her to. Because protecting the people you love sometimes means making sacrifices they don't want you to make." For the first time, Marcus looked genuinely puzzled, as if the concept of selfless love was so foreign to him that he couldn't process it. In that moment, Daniel felt not anger, but pity for this man who had everything money could buy, but had never experienced anything worth dying for. "It doesn't matter," Marcus said finally. "The dogs will find their trail eventually, and when they do, you'll all die together. Very touching, very romantic." "Maybe," Daniel said. "But maybe you're wrong about what people are capable of when they love each other. Maybe you're wrong about a lot of things." As Marcus's men prepared to continue the hunt, Daniel closed his eyes and thought about Emma's face when she laughed about Sophia's hand on her growing belly, about the family they had begun to build from love and hope and second chances. Whatever happened next, he had given them time. He had done everything a father, a lover, a protector could do. In the growing darkness of the Wisconsin forest, with his hands zip-tied behind his back and armed men preparing to hunt down his family, Daniel Hayes discovered something that Marcus Whitmore would never understand, that sometimes losing everything was the only way to win what mattered most. The hunt was far from over, and the night ahead promised dangers none of them could fully imagine. But somewhere in the wilderness, a pregnant woman and a 7-year-old girl were running toward safety, carrying with them the love and sacrifice of a man who had proven that heroism wasn't about the absence of fear, it was about choosing courage in the presence of love. The darkness of the Wisconsin forest seemed to swallow Sophia and Emma whole as they stumbled through undergrowth that caught at their clothes and scratched their skin. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, their own ragged breathing felt amplified in the silence, announcing their presence to anyone who might be listening. Behind them, growing more distant, but still audible, the voices of men and the baying of dogs painted a terrifying picture of the hunt that was closing in. Emma's small hand was slick with sweat in Sophia's grip, but the 7-year-old hadn't complained once despite the pace that was pushing both of them to their limits. Sophia's pregnancy made every step a challenge. Her center of gravity shifted, her breathing labored, but the image of Daniel standing alone against Marcus's men drove her forward with desperate determination. "Are we lost?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above their footsteps. "No, sweetheart." Sophia lied, having no idea where they were or where they were going. "We're just taking the long way to safety." They had been following the stream for what felt like hours, their feet numb from the cold water, when Emma suddenly stopped. "Listen," she said urgently. Sophia strained to hear what had caught the child's attention. There, beneath the sound of flowing water and rustling leaves, the distant hum of traffic. A road, civilization, possible rescue. "This way," Sophia whispered, turning toward the sound. The stream had led them to a small highway that cut through the forest like a ribbon of salvation. Cars passed infrequently, their headlights sweeping across the trees before disappearing into the night. Sophia and Emma crouched in the underbrush, trying to decide whether the risk of exposure was worth the chance of finding help. The decision was made for them when they heard the dogs again closer, now their baying echoing off the trees with renewed excitement. Marcus's men had found their trail. "We have to try," Sophia said, pulling Emma toward the road's edge. The first car passed without slowing, then the second. Sophia's heart sank as she realized how they must look disheveled, desperate, emerging from the forest like fugitives. Who would stop for strangers in the middle of nowhere, especially strangers who looked like they were running from something? The third vehicle, an old pickup truck that had seen better decades, began to slow as it approached. Sophia stepped into the road, waving frantically. Emma pressed against her side. The truck stopped, and an elderly man with kind eyes and weathered hands rolled down his window. "You folks okay?" he asked, taking in their appearance with obvious concern. "Please," Sophia said, tears streaming down her face. "We need help. There are men chasing us and She looked down at Emma, this brave little girl, who had become so precious to her. "My daughter and I need to get somewhere safe." The man's expression hardened with protective anger. "Get in," he said simply. His name was Frank Morrison, no relation to Daniel's boss, Tony. Just one of those coincidences that felt like fate, and he had been driving these back roads for 60 years. He asked no questions as they climbed into his truck, just pulled back onto the highway, with the steady competence of a man who had seen enough of life to recognize when people needed help more than explanations. "There's a sheriff's station about 30 miles up the road," Frank said, glancing in his rearview mirror as headlights appeared behind them. "We'll get you folks sorted out." But the headlights were gaining on them fast, and Sophia felt ice form in her stomach as she recognized the aggressive driving pattern of Marcus's men. "They're following us," she said quietly. Frank's jaw tightened as he pressed harder on the accelerator. His old truck complained but responded, picking up speed on the winding forest road. "Well, then we'd better make sure they don't catch us." And what followed was a chase that felt torn from a movie, Frank's ancient pickup racing through the Wisconsin night, pursued by Marcus's expensive SUVs, taking curves on 2 wheels, while Emma pressed her face against Sophia's shoulder and tried to be brave. Frank drove with the confidence of someone who had traveled these roads since before GPS existed, taking shortcuts through logging trails and back roads that his pursuers couldn't anticipate. "Hold on, ladies," Frank said, as he took a sharp turn that led to a steep downhill grade. "This old girl's got some fight left in her yet." Behind them, one of the SUVs took the turn too fast and went sliding off the road into a ditch. The second vehicle continued the pursuit, but Frank's knowledge of the terrain was giving them the advantage they needed. The sheriff's station appeared like a beacon in the darkness, a small building with patrol cars parked outside and lights that promised safety and the rule of law. Frank pulled up to the front door and helped Sophia and Emma out of the truck, just as their pursuers' headlights crested the hill behind them. "Go," Frank said urgently. "I'll handle this." Sophia wanted to thank him, to somehow express what his kindness had meant, but there was no time. She grabbed Emma's hand and ran for the sheriff's station door, bursting inside just as the pursuing SUV screeched to a halt in the parking lot. The deputy on duty, a young man who looked barely old enough to shave, took one look at Sophia's condition and Emma's frightened face and immediately shifted into crisis mode. Within minutes, the station was buzzing with activity as senior officers arrived and Sophia explained the situation between ragged breaths. "Marcus Whitmore," Sheriff Patterson said grimly after Sophia had told her story. "We've had a bolo out on him since he skipped bail in Chicago. And you're saying he's got Daniel Hayes somewhere in the forest? He sacrificed himself to give us time to escape," Sophia said, her voice breaking. "He's alone out there with those men, and I don't know if he's even still alive." Sheriff Patterson was already coordinating with state police and calling in a helicopter with thermal imaging equipment. "Ma'am, I promise you we're going to find him. But first, let's get you and the little one somewhere safe." The safe house was a modest ranch home on the outskirts of a small town, guarded by federal marshals who had been brought in once it became clear that Marcus Whitmore's crimes crossed state lines. Emma fell asleep on the couch while Sophia paced the living room, her phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated with lawyers, law enforcement, and private security firms. "Any word?" she asked Marshal Davidson every time he entered the room. "Still searching," was always his reply. "But ma'am, you need to understand it's a big forest out there, and it's been several hours since you last saw him." The implications of those words, that Daniel might already be dead, that Marcus might have executed him the moment Sophia and Emma were out of sight, sent waves of nausea through her body that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. It was just before dawn when Marshal Davidson's radio crackled to life with news that made Sophia's knees weak with relief and terror in equal measure. "We found the cabin," the voice reported. "Signs of struggle, some blood, but no bodies. Looks like they moved inland deeper into the forest." "Is the helicopter still searching?" Davidson asked into his radio. "Negative. Fog's too thick right now, but we'll resume aerial search as soon as visibility improves." Sophia sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the wilderness where Daniel was being held. Thousands of acres of forest, countless places to hide a prisoner, endless opportunities for Marcus to eliminate the only witness who could testify against him. "He's alive," Emma said quietly from the couch, her voice cutting through Sophia's despair. "How do you know, sweetheart?" "Because Daddy promised he'd come back to us. And Daddy always keeps his promises." The simple faith in Emma's voice, a 7-year-old's absolute belief in her father's invincibility, broke something inside Sophia's chest. This child had already lost one parent. The possibility of losing another was unthinkable. Miles away in a hunting cabin that Marcus had appropriated for his purposes, Daniel Hayes was discovering exactly how far a desperate man would go to protect what he thought belonged to him. The abandoned structure was maybe 60 years old, built by hunters and trappers who had long since moved on or died. Now it served as a perfect prison, isolated, soundproof, and far from any help. Marcus's men had bound Daniel to a wooden chair with zip ties and duct tape, but it was Marcus himself who conducted the interrogation. He paced the cabin's small interior like a caged animal, his expensive clothes incongruous in the rustic setting, his desperation growing more evident with each passing hour. "She can't hide forever," Marcus said, taking another sip from a bottle of whiskey he'd found in the cabin's cupboard. Eventually, she'll need medical care. Eventually, she'll make a mistake. Daniel said nothing, had been saying nothing for hours, despite Marcus's increasingly creative attempts to extract information. His silence wasn't born of stubbornness, but of certainty, the absolute knowledge that every minute he kept Marcus focused on him was another minute for Sophia and Emma to get further away. "You know what I don't understand?" Marcus continued, settling into another chair like he was beginning a casual conversation. "What she sees in you. I mean, I get the hero complex thing, you saved her life, very romantic, very noble. But long term, what could you possibly offer a woman like Sophia?" Daniel met Marcus's gaze, steadily refusing to be baited. No money, no connections, no prospects beyond manual labor. A ready-made family with another man's child. And let's be honest, you're not exactly leading man material. Marcus gestured dismissively at Daniel's appearance, 3 days of stubble clothes torn from their flight through the forest, dried blood from the beating he'd received. "But I suppose that's what makes it perfect from her perspective." Marcus continued, his voice growing more venomous. "A man so grateful for her attention, so dependent on her charity, that he'd never leave. A pet, essentially. Something to make her feel magnanimous and needed." The words were designed to hurt, to create doubt, to break Daniel's spirit in ways that physical violence couldn't accomplish. But Marcus had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of what Daniel and Sophia had found together. "You're wrong," Daniel said quietly, speaking for the first time in hours. Marcus looked up with interest. "Oh, please enlighten me." "She doesn't need me," Daniel said, his voice growing stronger. "That's what you don't understand. Sophia could have anyone, someone with money, someone with status, someone who could give her the kind of life she's used to. But she chose me anyway." "Chose you for what?" "For the same reason I chose her. Because when you find someone who sees you, really sees you, not your bank account or your potential usefulness, but who you actually are, you don't let them go, you fight for them, you sacrifice for them. You become the best version of yourself because they believe you're worth loving." Marcus stared at Daniel as if he were speaking a foreign language. "That's the most naive thing I've ever heard." "No," Daniel said quietly. "That's the difference between us. You think love is about what you can get from someone. I know it's about what you're willing to give." The conversation was interrupted by one of Marcus's men entering the cabin with news that made everyone freeze. "Boss, we got a problem. Police helicopters, search teams, the whole 9 yards. They're coordinating out of the sheriff's station, and they're expanding the search grid." Marcus's face darkened with rage and frustration. "How did they find us so fast?" "The women must have reached help. Word is there's federal marshals involved now, FBI on the way. This has gone way beyond a simple family dispute." "Then we accelerate the timeline," Marcus said coldly. "If I can't get to Sophia directly, I'll send her a message she can't ignore." Daniel felt ice form in his veins as he understood what Marcus was planning. "She won't come for me. I made her promise not to come back." "Oh, I think you underestimate how much you mean to her," Marcus said with cruel satisfaction, "especially when she receives proof of what happens to people who interfere with family business." One of Marcus's men produced a video camera, and Daniel realized with sickening clarity what kind of message they intended to send. A recording of his execution delivered to Sophia to force her into the open, to make her choose between her own safety and watching the man she loved die. "You sick bastard," Daniel said, struggling against his bonds. "I'm practical," Marcus corrected. "Sophia responds to emotional manipulation, always has since we were children. Show her something tragic and she'll come running to fix it, even if it destroys her in the process." As Marcus's men prepared their equipment, Daniel found his mind drifting to Emma's face, to the way she'd looked at him, with absolute trust, even as he'd asked her to be brave. He thought about Sophia's hand on her belly, protecting the child, who would never know their biological father, but might grow up knowing what real love looked like. If this was how his story ended, if Marcus succeeded in using his death to draw Sophia into a trap, then Daniel wanted his final words to count for something. "Before you start recording," he said, surprised by how calm his voice sounded, "I want to say something." Marcus gestured for his men to wait. "By all means. Last words are so important." Daniel looked directly into the camera lens and spoke to the two people who had become his entire world. "Emma, if you're watching this, I need you to remember what I told you about being brave. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. Take care of Sophia and the baby. Okay? Help them be a family." His voice broke slightly before he continued. "And Sophia, I need you to know that every choice I made from that first moment on the street to right now I made because I love you. Don't let this man win by giving up everything we built together. Raise your baby. Raise Emma if she'll let you. Live the life we dreamed about, even if I can't be there to share it with you." Marcus made a disgusted sound. "Touching, truly. Now if you're finished with your soap opera monologue..." The cabin door exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood and tactical officers in full gear. "FBI, nobody move." What followed happened so fast that Daniel's adrenaline-soaked brain could barely process the sequence of events. Marcus's men reached for weapons they never had a chance to use. Smoke grenades filled the cabin with choking fog. Tactical officers swarmed the interior, their movements precise and professional. Marcus himself tried to run for the back door, but was tackled by 2 agents before he could take 3 steps. As they wrestled him to the ground, he screamed obscenities that revealed the depth of his desperation and rage. "Daniel Hayes." One of the tactical officers was cutting through Daniel's restraints with a knife that looked like it could carve through steel. "Sir, are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Daniel tested his arms and legs as the circulation returned, wincing at the pain, but finding everything functional. "I'm okay. How did you find me?" "Your family, sir." The little girl remembered details about the men who took you clothing, voices, equipment. And Ms. Lane provided financial records that helped us track the resources Marcus Whitmore was using to fund this operation. As they helped Daniel out of the cabin and into the bright afternoon sunlight, had he really been captive for less than 12 hours, he saw the full scope of the law enforcement response. Helicopters, K-9 units, dozens of federal and local officers all coordinated to find one carpenter who had gotten in the way of a rich man's greed. "There's a helicopter waiting to take you back to your family," the FBI agent in charge explained as paramedics checked Daniel for serious injuries. "Ms. Lane and your daughter are safe, but they've been asking about you every 5 minutes since they reached help." The helicopter ride passed in a blur of treetops and lakes of radio chatter, coordinating the arrest of Marcus's remaining associates, of Daniel's mind slowly processing the reality that he was alive, free, and going home to the people he loved. The safe house appeared below them like a promise of peace, a simple ranch home surrounded by government vehicles and the machinery of justice. But what Daniel saw first standing in the yard and shielding her eyes against the helicopter's rotor wash was Sophia. Her dark hair whipped around her face, one hand pressed to her belly, the other reaching toward the sky as if she could pull him down to safety through sheer force of will. Beside her stood Emma, jumping up and down with excitement, waving both arms above her head in a gesture of pure joy that made Daniel's throat tight with emotion. The moment the helicopter touched down, Daniel was running toward them, his body protesting the movement, but his heart pulling him forward with irresistible force. Emma reached him first, launching herself into his arms with the fearless trust of a child who had never doubted her father would come home. "Daddy, Daddy, you came back. I knew you would." Daniel held his daughter tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her small body against his chest. "I promised, didn't I?" Then Sophia was there, her arms around both of them, tears streaming down her face as she pressed her forehead against his. "Don't you ever do that again," she whispered fiercely. "Don't you ever sacrifice yourself for us again." "I can't promise that," Daniel said quietly. "If protecting you and Emma means putting myself in danger, I'll do it every time. Then we'll just have to make sure we never need protecting again," Sophia said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. They stood there, in the yard of a stranger's house surrounded by federal agents and the apparatus of justice, and Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death, the absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Marcus Whitmore, faced with overwhelming evidence and testimony from multiple witnesses, accepted a plea bargain that would keep him in federal prison for the next 25 years. His assets were frozen. His associates prosecuted his network of corruption, dismantled by investigators who had been waiting years for exactly this kind of break. But for Daniel, Sophia, and Emma, the real story was just beginning. They returned to Chicago not as the same people who had fled in the night, but as a family forged in crisis and strengthened by survival. The modest apartment that had once felt like the limit of Daniel's possibilities now served as a temporary base while they planned for a future that seemed unlimited. "I've been thinking," Sophia said one evening, as they sat around Daniel's kitchen table, Emma coloring, while the adults talked about the future, "about what we want our life to look like." "And what do you want it to look like?" Daniel asked. "I want Emma to have that purple bike for her birthday. I want you to take the job renovating the downtown properties, not because I'm giving you charity, but because you're the most skilled craftsman I know. I want us to find a house with a yard where children can play safely and parents can sleep without worrying about what might happen in the night." "That sounds expensive," Daniel said carefully. "I have money," Sophia replied simply. "More money than any one person should have. But I don't want to use it to make you dependent on me. I want to use it to give us choices to build something together that neither of us could create alone." Emma looked up from her coloring book. "Will we still be a family when the baby comes?" "What do you think?" Sophia asked gently. Emma considered this seriously. "I think families aren't just about being born together. I think they're about choosing to love each other even when it's hard." The wisdom in those words, spoken by a 7-year-old who had lost one mother and found another through circumstances no child should have to endure, struck both adults into silence. "Then yes," Sophia said finally. "We'll be a family when the baby comes. All of us together." Daniel's daughter was born on a snowy February morning in a private room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Sophia had insisted on a natural birth, and Daniel held her hand through contractions that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. When Grace Sarah Hayes, named for the gift of second chances, and the mother who had watched over their journey, finally made her appearance, she entered the world surrounded by more love than most people experience in a lifetime. Emma, who had spent months preparing to be a big sister, approached the baby with the kind of reverent awe usually reserved for religious experiences. "She's so little," she whispered gently, touching Grace's tiny fingers. "And she has Daddy's nose." "Does she?" Sophia asked, exhausted but radiant. "Definitely. and maybe your eyes. But she's going to have her own personality, I think. Her own way of being special. Daniel looked down at his new daughter legally adopted before her birth, through papers Sophia's lawyers had expedited, and felt the same overwhelming protectiveness he'd experienced when Emma was born. This child would never know want or danger if he could help it. She would grow up understanding that love was the most valuable inheritance anyone could receive. The house they eventually chose was in Evanston, close enough to the city for Daniel's work, but far enough out to have a yard where children could play without supervision. It was big enough for privacy, but small enough to encourage togetherness, elegant enough to satisfy Sophia's aesthetic sense, but practical enough for a family with 2 young children. Emma's 8th birthday party was held in that backyard with a purple bicycle complete with silver streamers and a white wicker basket serving as the centerpiece of celebrations that included not just family, but the community they had built around themselves. Mrs. Chen was there, delighting in seeing Emma so happy and settled. Tony Morrison attended with his family, offering Daniel partnership opportunities that recognized his skills without condescending to his circumstances. Even Frank Morrison, the elderly man who had helped them escape Marcus's pursuit, drove down from Wisconsin to see how their story had ended. But it was the quiet moments that meant the most to Daniel mornings, when he woke to find Sophia nursing Grace while Emma read quietly beside them, evenings, when they worked together to prepare dinner, while the baby slept in her carrier nights, when he tucked Emma into her new bedroom, and she told him about her day with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved and protected. "Do you ever think about that day?" Sophia asked one evening, as they sat on their front porch watching Emma practice riding her bicycle in the fading light. Grace dozed in Sophia's arms, occasionally making the small sounds that newborns use to remind the world of their presence. "Which day?" "The day you saved my life. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd made a different choice, if you'd just kept walking?" Daniel considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I look at what we have now, at Emma riding her bike, and Grace sleeping in your arms, and I can't imagine any other choice. Even knowing everything that would happen, Marcus, the danger, the fear, I'd make the same decision." "Why?" "Because the alternative is a world where we never found each other. Where Emma never had a little sister to love, where Grace never had a big sister to teach her about courage and kindness. Where you and I never discovered that love doesn't have to make sense to be real." Sophia shifted Grace to one arm so she could take Daniel's hand with the other. "I used to think happiness was something that happened to other people, something I could buy or earn or deserve through good behavior. But this, what we have, it's not something I earned. It's something we built together, choice by choice, day by day." As if summoned by their conversation about choices, Emma stopped her bicycle in front of the porch and looked up at them with the serious expression she wore when important thoughts were occurring to her. "Daddy," she said, "when Grace gets old enough to understand, are you going to tell her about the day you saved Mommy Sophia?" The title had evolved naturally, Emma's way of honoring both Sarah's memory and Sophia's place in their lives. It was a solution that satisfied everyone while acknowledging that love could expand to include new people without diminishing what came before. "What do you think I should tell her?" Daniel asked. Emma considered this carefully. "I think you should tell her that sometimes being a hero isn't about being strong or brave. Sometimes it's just about caring more about other people than you care about yourself. And that when you do that, sometimes you get to keep the people you save forever." Daniel felt tears prick at his eyes as he looked at his daughter, this wise, wonderful little girl who had survived loss and change and danger with her capacity for love intact. "I think that's exactly what I'll tell her." As the sun set over their neighborhood, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, that reminded Daniel of hope made visible, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. A single bullet had changed everything, not just the trajectory of their lives, but their understanding of what family could mean, what love could accomplish, what ordinary people could achieve when they chose courage over comfort. Grace stirred in Sophia's arms, opening eyes that would soon learn to see the world as a place where fathers came home from work every evening, where mothers read bedtime stories and kissed scraped knees, where big sisters taught important lessons about kindness and resilience. She would grow up believing that love was the most natural thing in the world, never knowing how rare and precious the security she took for granted actually was. Emma rode her bicycle in lazy circles on the sidewalk, practicing the independence she would need as she grew older, while staying close enough to hear her parents' voices. In a few years, she would be old enough to understand the full significance of that September day when her father had thrown himself between a stranger and a bullet. She would comprehend the courage it had taken, the sacrifice it had represented, the love it had ultimately created. But for now, she was simply a little girl with a purple bicycle, secure in the knowledge that her family was complete. Her future was bright, and the people who loved her would always choose her safety over their own comfort. Daniel Hayes looked at his wife. They had married quietly, in a small ceremony attended by their closest friends, with Emma as flower girl, and Grace sleeping peacefully in the arms of their makeshift wedding planner, Mrs. Chen, and felt the kind of contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. The man who had once measured his worth by his ability to provide basic necessities for his daughter now understood that the greatest gift he could give his children was the example of love that puts others first. The woman who had once used her wealth as a shield against genuine human connection had learned that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought, only built through daily acts of care and commitment. As Chicago settled into evening around them, as neighbors walked their dogs and other families gathered on front porches to watch the day end, Daniel and Sophia Hayes sat together on the steps of their home, surrounded by the laughter of children and the peace of choices well made. They had saved each other in every way that mattered, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the most ordinary act of human kindness, one person choosing to protect another no matter the cost. The bullet that had brought them together was long since healed, but the love it had created would last forever, growing stronger with each passing day, each shared challenge, each moment of joy they built together in the life they had fought so hard to claim.